Hello. Hi, welcome to World Building Crime and Punishment. I am Hafida Sophia, or H Sophia on Discord, and I'm the moderator today. I'm here with three panelists, and we're going to be talking about world building and imagining perhaps the future of crime and punishment and what that might look like in a defunded, depoliced world. So I'm going to go ahead and let the three other folks here introduce themselves, and we'll just go ahead and start maybe alphabetically so that way we can keep order. And I'll let you go ahead first, Chris.
Hey everybody, I'm Chris Silverspook Miller. I'm a Native Hawaiian game developer as well as activist, defender of Mauna Kea here on the Big Island of Hawaii. I'm also I'm a STEM teacher and also have been a social worker over the years. And yeah, my biggest thing is I make video games now. I run Silverspook Games, which is basically me. I do the art, music, writing, programming, and voice acting and such. To try to tell stories from the perspective of, basically a colonized, ghettoized individual who has a lot of personal interactions with both police, inequality, and a lot of the knock-on effects, which is literally, I created actually the game Neophied, which is behind me. I created it I wrote it like 2008, 2009, 10. And it just so happens to deal directly with police murder, unaccountable police, social, economic, and political inequality, the prison industrial, police industrial, and military industrial complex, and how they work together. And so it just happens to be very poignant right now. And so I'm very happy to be here to talk about this particular subject with all of you.
Hi, I'm Fuzz Meadows. I'm a genderqueer fantasy author. I'm Australian, but I'm currently resident in the US. And I'm sort of fascinated by history, culture, world building, and how all of those elements intersect, particularly around issues of justice, diversity, and equality.
And I'm Preemi Mohammed, and I'm a writer and a scientist, and I currently work as a public servant in environmental regulation. So I'm coming at this at least partly from the perspective of a regulator who literally has the power to decide what's a crime and what's not a crime, but also as a fiction writer with about 30-ish short stories out there. And my debut novel came out this March.
Thank you. So thank you, Preemi, Chris, and Faz. We're going to start off with the question. We had been talking, for those out there watching, we had been talking before this about the issue of what is crime. So Preemi brought up that as a person who's in the environmental regulation industry, that she's in a position of having some power around that. So did you want to start off talking a little bit about maybe how is crime defined, or how even are crimes determined in your experience?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good question, because as soon as you say that, we have to remember that the whole thing that we're talking about here is not something that comes up naturally in a society. It's the byproduct of a structure, a framework that we have decided to let governments basically take over. And so crime is what, and this is going to be really simplistic, but crime is what the regulator says a crime is. And that's how, as we were saying in the pre-chat, you can have things like, being homeless is a crime, or being a runaway slave that doesn't want to be a slave anymore is a crime. And I know we were also saying a lot of it is due to unmet needs, but there are also other things that we consider crimes that kind of, for some reason, get a pass. Like the example I was going to use was a company or corporation that has a gigantic spill, say, and contaminates an area. We don't call that a crime. If they contaminate the area and cover it up and try to prevent it from being discovered, then that's a crime. And so I think, at least for us, it's coming down to intent. And this is why we were saying, like, as Foz was saying, a lot of things that we have deemed to be crime are actually the result of unmet needs. But once those needs are met for things like shelter and food and mental health supports and meaningful work and education, you're still left with things like companies that want to do crime and cause harm because they think it's better for their bottom line. And you still have crimes of passion and stuff. And the other example I was thinking of was crimes that don't necessarily need to happen, but they happen because people want the benefits of it. So sand and gravel theft, there's actually a crime ring operating in the Mediterranean that hacks into and spoofs the GPS signals of cargo ships and then basically pirates their cargo, which is aggregate, sand and gravel. So they're stealing all this material because they want to, not because they have unmet needs, but because that is something they want. And I think even if we have a system where we decriminalize everything that's caused by legitimately unmet needs, we're still going to end up with people that are just like, no, I just really want to do bad things and get money.
Yeah, I think it's what's frustrating in the current situation when you talk about decriminalizing the police, decriminalizing the police, having the police not be criminal, talking about defunding the police and talking about a different sort of method and execution of justice, is that you can talk about things that would seem intuitively to be criminal, and then you realize that the current system doesn't punish them. So when you're talking about huge corporate thefts, or like mass theft of wages, or the fact that the minimum wage in America nobody can live on, that should be a crime because that is causing so much harm. But that's not something that's penalized. White collar crimes frequently not penalized. Corporate crime, or like as you were talking about, environmental crime on massive scales, is not penalized. When you talk about two of the most intimate crimes, like intimate partner violence or rape, which is seen to be intuitively, people, if you cite that, go, yes, that's a crime that needs to be addressed. The current police system is appalling at dealing with those things. And I think the statistic is something like in America, 40% of police officers are domestic offenders. And it creates this really frustrating thing where, yes, you have this huge systematic bias that has fed into creating the police mentality and the police state as it is. And it's so entrenched that you can't prize it out at this thing. You'd be trying to prize the thing out of itself. And then in order to look at, well, what has this system been designed to do? Well, if you're looking at a police system that derived from slave catching and that then was changed on certain levels to call things crimes that were not previously crimes in order to arrest people who had previously been slaves, so that you were able to keep that labor force going. Like learning about it as an Australian, learning about American police history and slavery history, all comparatively recently, like it's shocking to me that so many major prisons are on the site of former plantations, and that's just not just like that's a thing. And the fact that slavery under the 14th Amendment is still technically legal if it's as punishment for a crime. All of these little loopholes, but they're not loopholes because they're not there by accident. They are the purpose of the thing, to create a certain type of an underclass and to create free labor, essentially. And you get the whole prison industrial complex from that. But yeah, you still that itself seems intuitively to be a crime, but it's a crime that's not designed to be policed by the system that enforces it.
Yeah. Those are great points, Faz. And one of the things that makes me think of is like, the more I hear this word crime, the more it begins to it's like looking at a word for a really long time and then starts to sort of not look like recognizable anymore. And so
I always get that with the word yacht because it's spelled so stupidly.
That is a very strange word. But the idea of crime, it's becoming more like a concept and versus like an actual thing. And I think one of the things Primi had said before was, crime is basically what it's decided, the authorities decide that it is. Chris, did you have any thoughts about that question of like, what is crime, or how do you see it? How have you seen it defined in your life and where you are?
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm glad I don't have to start out as the most spiciest radical person on this panel. That's great. Usually I'm the one ranting for 77,000 hours. But anyway, it's great that you already covered the bases that I wanted to touch on. But yeah, crime is whatever the power structure that is currently in power describes it as. And what has been crime in my life? Crime is being Hawaiian. It was illegal to speak Hawaiian until 1986 in Hawaii. I don't know if they're not going to tell you that in the, here's your flower lei, aloha. By the way, it's illegal to be Hawaiian in Hawaii, but we can say aloha and mahalo. Aloha, thank you for getting off of Hawaiian Airlines, owned by a white dude, and it makes $3.3 million a year to sit around and culturally prostitute Hawaiian culture. Mahalo, thanks for staying in the Waikiki fake plastic luau and with those fake cellophane lei and grass skirts bastardize our old culture for $7.50 an hour while living in ghettos, working 3 jobs every night. Crime is saying, "Ua malke ea okaine kapono," the life of the land is perpetuated in righteousness. That's a crime. My parents were scared to say anything in Hawaiian. Dancing hula was illegal. You can dance the Elvis Presley shaking the hips for some leering, creepy white dude who's going to sexually harass you, and no cops will or rape you in a hotel, and no cops will prosecute for that. And as I said before, if you want to give Donald Trump money, stay in the Ritz-Carlton. If you want to give Goldman Sachs money, by extension, most of the Democratic Party, stay inside of the Turtle Bay Resort. If you want to give Mitt Romney money, stay in many other conglomerates at the Marriott Hotel International Tourism Complex Corporation, which are all over Hawaii. Larry Ellison also owns he's the 5th richest man on the planet. He owns an entire one of our islands. That's not a crime. Mark Zuckerberg is kicking us off of our sacred lands. He has a 700-acre ranch, and he's taking us away from our ancestral fishing and kalo and breadfruit harvesting grounds. And that's not a crime. But you know what's a crime? A crime is speaking Hawaiian. A crime is a crime to be Hawaiian. It's a crime to be Black, literally. The FBI has 330,000 pages of investigation on Black identity. Being Black is a crime. Being Hawaiian is a crime. Being Indigenous is a crime because the United States is a crime. It was founded, its birth is a 260 plus slave owner who is also a child rapist. It was founded on genocide and stolen land. And so as we're kind of saying, I'm just going to say it a little bit harder since we're already going there. Standing on Mauna Kea and asking for the United States to respect international law and United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, prior informed consent to build on their own lands that are unceded since 1892, admitted by Presidents Grover Cleveland and President Bill Clinton in a formal apology in 1992. But the United States doesn't respect international law. Empires don't respect international law. Democracy-free, barbarian, white supremacist, capitalist, imperialist empires do not respect law of any kind. They do not respect humanity. They don't respect ecology. They don't respect society. They don't respect anything. And we witnessed that when we were attacked by police and the AR-15 wielding police, LRAD sound cannons, and B-52H strato fortresses dropping bombs 6 miles from our elders, our kupua's heads on Mauna Kea. We witnessed that's the true face of it. So if you want to, I every day I wake up and I say, thank God I wasn't born in Iraq. Because if we hold a sign that says Iraqi lives matter, you're just picking up bits of your infant's, organs off the side of the library that they missed. So what is a crime, right? What is a crime? What is it? What in the empire of crime, the ethical person is a criminal, right? In the right, it's everything. My existence is a crime. I shouldn't exist. I was the N-word of the Pacific at my private school that cost $20,000 a year to go to. I make less than what in my entire salary, even when I was teaching, than what it cost to send one of my children to that school. I can only go there because my father taught there. So my existence is a crime. That's what being Hawaiian is a crime. It still is. In 2018, Kalikoa Ka'eo, a professor of Hawaiian language and at the University of Maui, was arrested for speaking Hawaiian in a court. Being Indigenous is a crime. I just got my streams demoted on YouTube. The Wet'suwet'en and Unistoten Twitter accounts were deleted off of Twitter. That's a crime. Resisting colonialism is a crime. Anyway, that's the end of that. I better stop.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. I'm so glad you're here, and I've gotten to see you. I think this is my 3rd time seeing you today, and so thank you. You put out so much energy, and I hope that this is not draining for you by the end of today.
Like I said, I do that for like hours sometimes because, as I said before, if I am very passionate and I'm saying a lot of things, I work with too many hundreds of kids who are dead because of police. because of the poverty, of the violence of poverty that they have exacted on each other. And watched my own family deny their own Hawaiianness. My aunt literally bleached her skin white and married a millionaire fossil fuel and military oligarch. And I speak for the people who can't speak, you know, because they're dead or they're in prison. So anyway, I better, yeah, but yeah.
We'll come back to you, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah.
We will. So, I mean, I think I'm just taking a minute to kind of hear everything that's been said. And it's like, I'm hearing the same thing, but obviously in different ways from different perspectives, which is the purpose of having a panel. And we had talked about, I mean, I think one of the things that might be really surprising to some people, and actually, Faz, you mentioned it earlier, is just sort of the growing awareness of the disparity between the difference between how crime and punishment is sort of how we're sort of acculturated and conditioned to think about what is a crime and what is punishment. I mean, I know, for example, when sometimes I'll be cruising the neighborhood Facebook group or something, and I'll see people get so bent out of shape because somebody graffitied something, or some minor crime was committed, like someone vandalized something, and I just see people like really like almost calling for their heads, like, oh, these vagrants and the delinquents and all these terrible things should happen to them. And then I'm thinking, but what about corporate wage theft? Like how are people so distracted by this like trivial like, what do you call it, misdemeanor behavior, and yet completely okay with like seriously violent and just it's almost like it's so big you can't see it. I don't know what it is, but I think part of that comes from just the conditioning, and a lot of that conditioning comes from the ways in which police and crime are depicted in our media and in our common, popular culture. And so maybe let's just take a little bit of time to think about or talk about maybe what you think about that, what you think about how crime and punishment and police, the depictions of those things, how that is actually impacting us and maybe distracting us from maybe what are the real crimes.
So I'm as a genre fan, like, and I think a lot of people are like this. Sherlock Holmes is like a classic detective story. It's something that a lot of us absorb at a really early age. And what we forget though with Sherlock Holmes, firstly, was that he's a compassionate character, and secondly, that he wasn't the police. The whole point that his reason for existing was skepticism of the police and an acknowledgement of the fact that they didn't solve a lot of things that they needed to, that they didn't investigate certain crimes. And I didn't realize, and like, I've always been a fan of murder mysteries and those kinds of shows, those procedurals. And it's very much a case of white privilege in my instance, because I didn't have to have any negative experiences with police in my own life, pure based on my identity, that would have shaken me and made me look at those shows and go, oh, wait, this isn't right. And so it wasn't until a friend sort of used, when I was talking about Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and a friend used the phrase "copaganda" and how they didn't like to watch it for that reason. And a light bulb went off, and because I sort of stopped, and they went, oh, shit, wait, no, that you're actually right. And I hadn't known about this until sort of I heard others start talking about it. But up until sort of the 80s and the show Dragnet, it was apparently really common. You wouldn't show the police as the good guys. They would just sort of be bumbling, they'd be violent, they'd be what they are essentially. But then Dragnet became this thing of showing the police in a good light, and that was sort of like the big first American propaganda show of Dragnet makes the cops look really cool and really important. And ever since then, you have this constant literature of shows that deal with violent crime, which exaggerate the amount of violent crime that there is. When, like, if you look at Special Victims Unit or NCIS or any of those shows, and you've got sort of quirky, funny ones, you've got something like Castle, And it bleeds that Sherlockian detective thing, which I think it's understandable to enjoy, because that's an individual. That's the key thing about like the Sherlockian detective is, one, they're an individual. They're not within the system. They exist to critique the failings of the system and to serve those who are not served by the system, while also solving crimes that we can all kind of objectively agree need to be solved and addressed, often with more nuance than the system itself can provide. But they'll take a character like that and bleed it into the existing police system, like with Castle, when you've got the author Richard Castle helping the NYPD to solve crimes, and it does sink into your consciousness, into your subconscious. And particularly if you are like me in a position of racial privilege, where you're not somebody who's going to be stopped by the police just for how you look, it takes somebody to actually mention it to you, or for you to really pay attention to notice, oh, hey, there is a massive dissonance between how this thing is portrayed and how it is experienced by the vast majority of people, and particularly by people that belong to groups or who live in situations where they are constantly being stopped and frisked or confronted with violence or suspected of something just because, you know, the crime of standing while black, basically. And it's infuriating when you learn that exists, but it's more infuriating to never have a time when you didn't know, because that was always your lived experience of having to deal with that.
Were you going to say something, Primi?
Yeah, I was going to say the Sherlock Holmes thing sort of lit up something and reminded me, I was talking to a friend, I don't know, a couple of months ago or something, and I said something like, I think there is actually an endemic idea that people aren't aware that they have, that the police exist to prevent crime from happening. But even like 30 seconds of thought will tell you that's not remotely true. Like, A, they don't. B, they probably cause crimes. C, they commit their own crimes. But D, they're always responding to a crime that's already happened. And the problem with fictional depictions of cops is that they're focused on the first thing. So they're telling you that because the police exist, all these crimes didn't happen, and also we caught the people that did these other ones and punished them appropriately. And I think part of that, of course, is just the structure of fiction, which is that people want to be entertained. They want high stakes. They want clear heroes and bad guys. They're uncomfortable with nuance, and nuance isn't really good for the studio anyway. And so you end up with things like Hot Fuzz, you know, which everybody loves that movie. It's hilarious, and the cops are funny, and they're investigating these crimes, and they're going around the village, and they're preventing other crimes from happening, yada yada. I haven't seen Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but yeah, that's more of the same propaganda. I saw the first season of Luther, which kind of the same thing. The hero cop who is preventing more crimes and is, you know, strenuously investigating criminals, blah blah blah, and it makes you wonder how the heroism came out when even a quick glance at any sort of the statistics or even the common sense will tell you that that's not what cops are doing, and the rest of the justice system is also not doing what it seems to be doing in movies and TV. And, you know, jail doesn't do anything beneficial, and criminalizing behavior that people don't like doesn't do anything beneficial. And you know, even in Terry Pratchett, The Watch, I understand there's a new series that's coming out fairly soon, and I'm interested to see how they treat that. But even Terry Pratchett couldn't get away from these are good, heroic cops, and they're doing good things, and the people that they are against are bad people. And, you know, The Watch, which is composed of these characters that we love and have grown very used to, are definitely and unambiguously the good guys. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's very complicated. And when we get attached to these cop characters and then look at the real world, the disconnect is kind of unpleasant. And I don't think people like it.
Yeah. Oh, just to jump back as well, when you're talking about cops, or the idea that they prevent crime, the most common examples from people that I know, you know, have spoken to online or who I know in real life, are are women who will say, hey, my partner is, or my ex-partner is stalking me and I need you to do something. Or, hey, I'm being harassed on Twitter. Can somebody please take these death threats? I'm getting seriously. And overwhelmingly, the police will go, oh, but a crime actually hasn't happened yet, so we can't do anything. But surprise, surprise, when people are using Twitter accounts or whatever to talk about protesting or to say things about the bad things about the police, or more likely accurate things about the police, suddenly they're completely able to monitor what's going on and to track down who's responsible. But it's that systematic bias. And there is a lot of, as well as a lot of racism, there is a lot of misogyny in police logic. And so, if a woman's talking about her partner scaring her, probably she's hysterical, or she probably deserved it, or she's exaggerating, or she's out for revenge, or she's trying to ruin his life. And then surprise, surprise, the woman gets shot 3 days later.
Sounds like this is Hafida, and it sounds like I mean, what you and Primi are both saying is what I'm hearing is you're talking about like the failure of policing. Like how is it actually serving? Like what purpose is it serving? They're supposed to protect and serve, but if we have more crime, or we have crime, or even when in depictions of policing, there's so much crime for them to respond to. You're kind of like, how effective are you exactly? You know, like if you were really doing your job, would you be so necessary? But I think to me, that really connects policing to this idea of a force that is necessary to keep a population in check, because without this force, then, you know, all hell will be broken loose, right? But for me, one of the things that I find troubling is just it's such a pessimistic view of human nature and of human behavior, that we have to have the good guys who are willing to do bad things to prevent, I guess, the bad guys who are willing to do bad things. You need that line of defense. I don't know. What do you think, Chris? What do you think about this?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have kind of said things that I was going to say, but just to throw some of the statistics out there. The average cop solves less than one felony per year. There were 12,600 murders by police in the last 14 years, and only 3 were actually convicted of murder. So that's 0.02% are convicted of anything, and only 1% are ever prosecuted. And I think it's like they have 4 times higher, police have 4 times higher domestic abuse rate of their families. They solve less than 1% of rapes. There are 200,000 rape kits that go untested, all the things that you're saying. And the way that it's, and my kind of point in that question that I kind of brought up was the depictions of policing in shows, and we've talked about them a little bit, but yeah, Cops, NYPD Blue, Hawaii 5-0. I mean, in Hawaii as well. Brooklyn Nine-Nine, you have like, you know, cops of every color, black cop, Jewish cop, female cop, you know, Hispanic cop, right? All sci-fi cops, Torchwood, you know, fantasy cops, right? You know, Bright. Actually, I think that was one of the least bad of the movies. But, you know, we've got cops of every type. I think there's a study, 50% of all shows that have ever been produced by the United States, whether in Hollywood or otherwise, are cop shows, are protagonists. And there's a reason for that. Oliver Stone figured this out like in the 60s. It's because in order to maintain a unequal system under the kind of capitalism that the United States has, you need to have massive faith in the slave catcher police. And the slave auctioneer courts, who don't prosecute these cops, including Breonna Taylor's murderers, including Amy Klobuchar, who didn't go after abusive cops, and Derek Chauvin in George Floyd's murder. So those, and you know, so all of these, the criminal justice system, right, is like we're talking about this in the last panel about myths. This story of the good cop, this John Wayne, the strong cis white dude with the gun, stopping the one strong cis white dude with the gun, stopping the bad people. And who are the bad people? Indians, indigenous people. Who is it in Bad Boys, what you're gonna do, right? It's a cop, lighter cop throwing a dark-skinned person to the ground, right? For 33 years, only canceled just a couple months ago. Amazing. But this is everywhere. And the myth and the stories, these are what create and maintain, these are what maintain countries, peoples, nations, right? And the myth of the police, and by extension, the military, which is saving the world. But we're not specifically talking about that. But these things play together. The militarized police are the massive military industrial complex selling grenade launchers to kindergarten police officers in California, right? These things all work together under capitalism, as Primi was talking about as well. I mean, the need to make more money. It's a military, it's a police, and a prison industrial complex, and it will never be anything but that as long as all these systems that work together in a under a racialized capitalism, right, where you have disproportionate anyway, so I think that all these shows, I'm of the view that every film, every book, every New York Times bestseller, every show, every game, I love like even these games where you play like House of Police Quest, but I have to recognize even StarCraft, these games are about going around killing all the indigenous life, turning the Vespene gas and the copper and the lithium into battle cruisers, siege tanks, and space marines, or stormtroopers for the planetary Star Spangled. I'm sorry, it's just international. United States, interstellar United States, going to other places, taking the resources, converting it into machinery of death and destruction, policing the world, the universe, and then policing the internally colonized peoples. And all media, whether we like it or not, like I think there will be like sentient tardigrade orbital civilizations that will look down and say, it's interesting, all this media that was all about solving everything out the barrel of a gun on mass oppression, and this empire that crumbled somewhere between 2020 and 2040. It's really weird how they ran their entire, this putting cops and bombers and police and these cowboys and these captains Star Spangled Underpants and these billionaire philanthropists, arms dealer playboys on a pedestal. And it's so hard you can't even talk about it, because even my own nostalgia, I'm thinking about, I can't give up Doom. I can't give up these police games. I love all these. I watched NYPD Blue. I watched all these things. You can't escape it. We're all kind of stuck in that, which is part of it is like, how do we reimagine in something that is like, so we are stormtroopers as writers, as musicians, as programmers, as artists, as engineers. We're all on the Death Star, in some way or another. So that's a very hard trick, I think. But I think looking at what other peoples have done, indigenous peoples and other peoples around the world, like Vietnam, where there's only been one police death and it was somebody who was actually killing people, is part of that. And I'll cut it off there.
Thank you, Chris. I think one of the things that you're leading me to think about, and I'm looking at the time too. I guess now would be a good time. I think it's half hour. So if there's any questions, I don't know who's in the chat. I'm trying. I can only keep my eye on one thing at a time. But if there's any people have any questions watching, go ahead and put them in the chat, and then I'll see them here. And so go ahead and think about that. But in the meantime, I wanted to think about or talk about what have you read or seen? What stories are you familiar with where either there was no, not that there was no crime, but there was no criminal justice system? Like, have you read stories like that? I know when I write short fiction, speculative fiction, I write these stories because I don't want to, not because I don't want to deal with these problems, but because I kind of want to be post these problems. And so like, there's no police in my world. And yet there's still people like scheming against each other and doing all kinds of things, but there's just no police. But that's one way to look at it. What have you seen, or what are you working on? I know, Primi, you're working on something where you're trying to deal with alternative punishment or alternatives to criminal punishment. So just in terms of speculative or science fiction, what are you seeing out there?
Well, my own work came from a single phrase that I saw when I was doing some research about 2 years ago, and it was just the phrase social immunity. And what that meant was removing undesirable elements from the community such that they couldn't spread and infect the rest of the community. So extrapolated, that sort of is referring to things like, well, social immunity is when we heal the body of the community by removing pathogens or germs or shrapnel or bullets or whatever. So we take them and we put them in jail. But the other thing is that, again, it's the state that decides what those elements are. So the specific example was the mass arrests of not atheists, but pacifists and people that were resisting the war. And they literally criminalized not fighting and dying, which is, again, absolutely preposterous, but it gave me this idea of social immunity. So you take the elements that you don't like and you kind of make everything around them normative, and you remove them and you say, okay, they're gone now, everything's back to normal. So in the story, that's literally what happens, is that there's a war in a fantasy world, and there's a pacifist who gets arrested for being a pacifist and is told that he doesn't have to stay in jail, but his other option is to help the war effort by working on a very specific mission. So this goes against his values, but it's kind of it's just a rearrangement of the same. It's like labor camps. You can work off being one of these awful things that needs to be removed from society. And this also made me think of you guys read We by Yevgeny Zamyatin. It's kind of Brave New World, but the Russian version that came before Brave New World, and is, in my opinion, a much weirder and almost funnier and better book. But they have an operation that removes the imagination. So almost everyone, when they figure out that this is happening, almost everyone rushes, they volunteer for this operation. And the few people that don't are declared criminals, so they have it done involuntarily. And that's how they deal with the problem of prospective crime, is making it impossible to commit. And it doesn't take much of a leap to imagine sci-fi books where that's exactly how they deal with crime, is they prevent it from happening by having some kind of brain implant or something that responds to huge rushes of adrenaline or cortisol or something and incapacitates you. Or, like in Minority Reports, they have the precogs or whatever that predict that the crime's going to happen so that the police can go over and rush and be heroic and prevent it from happening. Or like in Nick Harkaway's Gnomon, where they have the two things. They have the system and they have the witness. So basically, you can commit a crime if you want, but absolutely guaranteed there is not a single place in the world anymore that you won't be watched, identified immediately, and arrested. So the kind of, the panopticon idea. And I think it's, again, interesting. I see a lot of these in sci-fi, and I'm trying to think of if I've seen a lot of alternative justice systems like restorative justice, like what we're trying to do here in fantasy. And maybe I'm just reading the wrong things because I can't think of anything.
So I'm reading at the moment, one of the books I'm reading at the moment is Savage Legion by Matt Wallace, which is a new release. And I'm not too far into it as yet, but one of the premises is, here is a society which appears always to be on a war footing, but whose citizens don't know that it's on a war footing. They are under the belief that they live in this perfect society where crime and poverty have all been sort of cleared away. But really it's just kept out of sight, and there is an abused and exploited underclass who is made to go and fight at the front that they don't know exists. And it's very much a commentary on the kind of the way in which empire disguises itself from its own citizens, which feels very relevant to modern America. But I think, talking about things like, so I haven't read Nomen yet, but I've got that book, which I'm looking forward to. I remember when Nick Harkaway was writing it, it was when the sort of Brexit stuff was just kind of starting. And he says, he had a comment where saying, it's very frustrating how much time I put into trying to write a believable descent into fascism, and then a ridiculous one just goes and happens in the real world. You do have these ideas like the precogs that you were talking about in Minority Report, which is very much that the ones who walk away from Omelas idea. And Nora Jemisin wrote a fantasy story, which was a response to Omelas, which is it's I think the first story in her How Long Until Black Future Month anthology, which is very good, talking about how even in a utopian society where you've managed to meet all of these needs, the thing that becomes poisonous is the ideas that will bring you back to the old society. And those are the ones that have to be met swiftly, like the sort of the seeping in again of fascism or Nazism, and the point at which if you are actually going to prevent the crime, you have to stop it when it's at the idea stage. You can't let it take root again.
Do you think, though, Foz, one of the things I'm thinking about, I mean, I think even with, the examples Primi gave, one of the things I see around that is it's applying the same mentality to the problem. And I mean, I'm coming at it from a perspective of like a domination sort of perspective, which is, you use force and you use violence, really not just force, because you can have all kinds of force, but it's really a kind of a violence to keep people in line. So knowing that people aren't perfect and that they make mistakes, that there are things like crimes of passion, how are there examples out there where people are simply choosing because of a different kind of force, to not, as Chris had mentioned earlier, wage war on the world, waging war on the environment and on the ecology, and like this just total, there's such a disrespect for the environment, and then for the human beings who are closest to that environment and who do respect that environment, that there's, I think, inside of our mind, we're conditioned to sort of see that force and violence is the way to, you can't do anything right without that. But I mean, it's like it's embedded in our culture. We're all coming out of colonized societies where we were just born into that. We're born into that mentality of, well, yeah, it's not great, but we need to have this violence to solve, to keep people in line. So what is there just a lack of those kinds of stories?
I don't think necessarily. So there's a fantastic Margaret Atwood short story called I think it's The Peach Women of Our, which is talking. It's kind of bleak in the sense that it's talking about the fundamental idea of, is a certain type of violence or a certain type of failing fundamentally human. And it takes the idea of these sort of two human starship pilots who end up in this pacifist people, the Peach Women. And if they hit them, they'll just sort of, it doesn't do anything. There can't really be any violence. And they're completely safe in there, but they don't feel like people. And I'm always warring between cynicism and optimism about the human state. I think, so one thing, if you look at, I'm trying to think off the top of my head of an example of something that's a sort of future society or a fantasy society with different modes of justice, and I'm blanking at the moment, but I don't think that means that none exist. I know that it's not like a work in progress that I've got at the moment.
I can think of one.
Yeah.
No, I was just thinking like, no, it makes sense that there are no really good long form, like very popular stories in the West anywhere, in any settler colonial country or in any capitalist country that gets any popularity, because that it doesn't relate to people's actual life. But I was reading I have a friend in Vietnam, and they were like reading some Vietnamese comic books about Uncle Ho. Their stories are actually about how to collectively restore justice. So it was about Uncle Ho like helping a kid. The lesson of the comic book that you learn that when you're reading at age 6 is about how parents and adults need to be good role models for kids. They have entire other ways of being. Indigenous society, just as an example, Native Hawaiians before contact lived 80 to 100 years. Contrary to popular belief that we're all backwards savages eating each other. If you watch a bunch of Pirates of the Caribbean or any media about the Pacific for much of the existence of Hollywood, etc. And really, like, but there are other ways of restorative justice. The concept of punishment, physical, even the way that you rear children, the beating the devil out of kids, which is very much part of American and much of the UK and other of these imperial countries. That was brought in later, and a lot of that's the original concept of authoritarian. We listen, we obey, and when they don't obey, then we crush, we beat, we whip, we arrest, we kill, we shoot, we kneel on the neck, we crucify, whether that's like on a literal crucifixion on a 6 foot by 6 foot piece of wood, or with a rope around the neck. That is not the way of Ho'oponopono. This is a Hawaiian way of community right making. That's about community. There is no physical violence. There were, in our traditional ways, there were no hitting. There was no. The first thing you would do was to try to give people other things to do. If the child was acting out, you'd care. Let's go do some more gardening. Let's do some hunting. Let's do something else. And then if it really became a problem, you would there'd be some isolation from a community. But that requires functional communities to do like this kind of, but there aren't any functional communities. There's only individual rational pursuing of their self-interest, Milton Friedmanian widgets, right, on a scoreboard in the United States, for sure, for the most part. And now we're starting to rebuild that in some parts, but it's still a long ways to go. And so, like, I think to get part of getting to a restorative, non carceral, non-police, non-violence and force-based justice, you have to go, there's thousands of years of history throughout all of the imperial civilizations that have crushed any peoples out of Europe, out of North and South Turtle Island, or what's called North and South America, and out of everywhere else. And so it's very difficult to find that kind of story. But I will say this, you know, and I think at the same time that we have to be careful. I don't think that we can just jump into, we can't just build a nice police-free commune in the outskirts of Oregon with our trust fund money, and then we're going to retire that. And no, we have to address the oppressive, colonial, racist, racialized capitalist systems in the way that they are. And so to do that, I think part of it is first telling the truth about those systems, which is why my story is about a social worker. And that whenever there's cops, the cops show up and they murder people and they get away with it. There are no protagonist cops. The cops are all terrible. And you get to play the part of choosing to either be fully complicit or partially complicit in the stealing of children from marginalized, well, they're robots because it's science fiction, but marginalized people. And part of it is telling the truth. And then the other half is, I haven't read or seen or played anything that has a good restorative justice. I've read stories in other languages, and I know of my own history that was denied myself, but I don't see anything in the dominant culture anyway.
Well, so something that
hang on, Faz. I just wanted to make sure we keep track of time. So we only have 3 minutes left. No, it's fine. It's a good conversation. And but I just wanted to let us know because I don't want us to get cut off mid-sentence. So we have 3 minutes left. And so maybe we have the three of you can have 1 minute for, I don't know. I know it feels so, I didn't do a very good job of controlling the flow, but I just wanted to hear everything you all had to say. So 1 minute to go around, and maybe just, there was a question about any recommendations with interestingly different justice systems. I think Chris gave some good pointers in that direction, but if anybody else wants to address that, you can do it in your minute out. So maybe Primi, you can go first, and then
okay. Yeah, just real quick. This is ridiculously interesting. I think we could have gone all night. I can't believe I didn't mention superheroes as cops, but superpowered cops. I think that could have been a productive line of conversation because everybody loves superheroes, but they are basically police. And secondly, I can't believe I also forgot to mention A Clockwork Orange and their method for getting around when people have done terrible ultraviolent crimes, which the less said about that, the better, but it is a really interesting read, and it's an interesting take on recidivism and preventing people from doing crimes again. And the last thing is that there was a really interesting article by the Walrus on restorative justice and how they were trying to set that up at the penitentiaries and stuff that we've got up here for the local indigenous people, and how the system was actually dismantled. And I didn't finish the article, so I don't know if they just lost funding or if somebody came in and interfered with it, but I am going to read that, and if I can find the link, I'll put it in the Discord.
One thing I was just going to say in response to, which I'll make my wrap up, in response to what Chris was saying about Indigenous methods of community maintenance and things like that. One was, I'd read a really interesting article a while ago about in Inuit communities, and I forget the specific name of this community, but the idea of teaching children to work out their emotions when they were acting out through story plays, essentially, where they'd get the child to reenact the thing that they'd done in a play to understand. And it was particularly important in those communities because of so much time spent isolated in long winters together, to have every member of the community be able to behave. And it was this really fascinating psychological insight. But also, and again, I'm going to forget the name of this, but there was a really fascinating example. And I wonder if this ties into when we look at policing, and we talk about justice, the size of the cities and things that we have now, because there was in the pre-colonial era in North America, there was once an enormous city, but of their own volition, the peoples who inhabited that, the First Nations peoples, decided actually the size of this place isn't working. It's putting the decisions around that affect people at too great a remove from the people that the decisions affect. And they went back to living in smaller communities. And it's this fascinating example of, well, okay, maybe that's the fundamental problem here, is that the things are too large, and it creates the greater opportunities for more crimes or for more issues.
Well, I think we're at time. Thank you. Chris, did you want to add anything else for the last 20 seconds? You're muted.
I agree with everything that that has been said. Yeah, no, I want to. Everybody else is kind of saying what I was already going to say, so I was just going kind of the extra mile. But I will say, like, yeah, definitely, we need to work on. I'm making some bigger statements because bigger statements have been made in my direction, right? I don't think there is absolutely no good examples because I haven't read everything. There's 40,000 pages of book come out every single second, so I'm sure there's something. I'm just
yeah,
you know.
We have work to do. I think as creators, we have work to do, and we should put more. I think maybe we should all maybe have a challenge of stories without any police, or stories where people figure out how to be in a relationship so they don't have to abuse each other into behaving. I don't know. And I do have the link to that article file. So about the Inuit, I will put it in the chat. All right, we'll see you all over in, I think, I don't know which one, even or odd, try them both. We'll see you in Discord. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you later. Thank you.
Bye.